Upon arriving at the Victorian house at dusk, a mix of excitement and apprehension took hold of me. The sun was hiding behind the trees, casting long, mysterious shadows over the facade of the building. The house, with its delicate towers and arched windows, seemed like a character from a fairy tale. But there was something about its appearance that left me uneasy. The dark wooden walls and the Gothic details, such as the wrought iron adornments, hinted at a past full of stories and perhaps secrets. "It's really impressive, isn't it?" said my friend Lucas, who accompanied me on the move. He looked at the house with a gleam of admiration in his eyes. "Salem has a fascinating history. You'll definitely find inspiration here." "Yes, it's beautiful, but I don't know. There's something strange about this place," I replied, trying to put into words the uncomfortable feeling that enveloped me. "It's as if I'm being watched." "You've watched too many horror movies, haven't you?" Lucas laughed, trying to ease the tension. "It's probably just the town's stories speaking louder. Let's go inside and see what it's like." I agreed, although a part of me hesitated. The door creaked as it opened, as if protesting against the interruption of its ancestral silence. The smell of mold and old wood flooded my nostrils, and I couldn't help but feel like an intruder in a space that belonged to another era. Inside, the decor was as rich as the exterior. Faded Persian rugs, dark wooden furniture, and framed portraits that seemed to watch me with curious gazes. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Lucas asked, noticing my hesitation as I took my first steps into the living room. "Do you want me to help carry the boxes?" "I'm fine, I just need to get used to it," I replied, trying to smile. "I think I'll explore a bit." "Sure, I'll take these boxes to the bedroom. Then we can meet in the kitchen for a snack. Okay? Sounds good." As soon as he walked away, a strange loneliness filled the space. The house seemed alive, whispering secrets in every corner, and I couldn't shake the impression that something was watching me. I headed toward the second floor, drawn by an inexplicable impulse. As I climbed the creaking stairs, a chill ran down my spine. In the hallway, I noticed a locked door at the end. What could be inside? Curiosity consumed me, but an inner voice told me not to approach. Something about that door unsettled me, as if it held more than just old objects. "Why are you standing there?" Lucas appeared behind me, startling me. "Are you afraid to open the door?" "It's just, I don't know. It's a locked door. Doesn't it seem a little strange?" "A little, maybe, but it's an old house, full of stories. You won't discover anything if you don't investigate." He smiled, but there was a teasing tone in his voice that made me hesitate even more. "Maybe later," I murmured, looking away. The last thing I wanted was to seem cowardly, but the idea of forcing my way through that door made me nervous. "Let's explore the rest of the house first." We went down to the living room and started unpacking some boxes. While Lucas organized the books, my mind wandered, absorbed in the locked door that seemed to be calling me. Part of me wanted to know what it hid, but another part feared what I might find. The first night in the house was marked by calmness, but not for long. Shadows danced on the walls under the dim light of the lamp, and a heavy silence filled the air. As I tried to focus on a new writing project, a feeling of discomfort began to grow in my chest. That's when I heard it. A sound, a distant echo of heavy footsteps resonating through the hallways. My heart raced, and I stopped writing, my fingers hovering over the blank page. The sound was as real as my own heartbeat. I slowly got up, trying to discern if it was just the house creaking or something more. "Lucas," I called, although I knew he was in the next room, lost in his own world. I received no answer, only the sound of footsteps continuing, as if something was moving through the house. A chill ran over my skin, and the feeling of being watched increased exponentially. With an impulse, I followed down the hall. The air felt heavy, and each step I took echoed like a call in the silence. The house was so quiet that I could hear my own breathing, which seemed loud and labored. When I reached the end of the hall, I stopped in front of the locked door. The sound of footsteps had ceased, but the fear had not. That's when I felt a cold breeze pass by me, as if someone was brushing past my side. "It's just your imagination," I murmured to myself, but the voice sounded fragile and unconvincing. I decided to go back to the room, thinking about how loneliness could be fertile ground for imagination. Upon entering, Lucas was sitting on his bed, an open book in his lap. He looked at me with a worried expression. "Are you okay? You looked scared out there." "I heard some noises," he said, closing the book. "It was just the house, I think. It's so old that it makes strange noises." I tried to smile, but the truth was that I was far from calm. "If you need someone to investigate, I'm here. And if you need company, just call," Lucas said, with a tone of camaraderie that made me feel a bit better. "Thanks. I'll try to get used to it. I just need some time." I thanked him and went to bed, but the following hours were torturous. Sleep wouldn't come, and the image of the locked door lingered in my mind like a shadow. Thoughts of Margaret began to surface, and I wondered who she had been and what was hidden within those walls. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, bringing a bit of relief to the tension that had accompanied me the night before. The warmth of the sunlight made everything feel friendlier, and I felt a little more encouraged to explore the house. I decided to start with the attic, an area that hadn't been explored yet. As I climbed the spiral stairs, dust danced in the beams of light, and the smell of old wood enveloped me. The attic was a spacious area, filled with dusty boxes and furniture covered with white sheets, like ghosts from the past. "If anything strange shows up, I'll be down here," Lucas shouted from below, breaking the silence. "Sorry, I can't make any promises," I replied with a nervous laugh. Curiosity was a powerful force, and I needed to discover what else that house had to offer. As I rummaged through the boxes, I found objects that seemed to belong to past generations. An antique gramophone, black and white photographs, and a trunk that was locked. My heart raced. What more could be hidden in that house? Finally, in a dusty box in the corner, I found a set of yellow diaries. The handwriting was elegant, and the leather cover was worn with age. The name Margaret was engraved on one of the covers. My heart raced. It was the name I had heard before, and now it was before me like a bridge to the past. "Sarah, are you there?" Lucas's voice echoed from below, bringing me back to reality. "I'm here," I shouted back, but my mind was far away, immersed in the pages waiting to be read. I sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes and shadows, and opened the diary. Margaret's words danced before my eyes. The first page was a description of her days, her hopes, and her fears. With each word I read, I felt an indescribable connection to her, as if her emotions echoed in my own heart. As the hours passed, time seemed to fade away. I was so absorbed that I didn't notice the daylight beginning to fade, and darkness was quickly approaching. When I finally looked at the clock, I realized that more time had passed than I had imagined. "Sarah, what are you doing up there?" Lucas called again with evident concern in his voice. "Just exploring," I replied, trying to maintain a cheerful tone. "I found some old diaries. I'll be down in a minute. Watch out for ghosts." The morning after that unsettling night, the soft sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the Victorian house, creating a play of shadows that danced on the walls. I woke up with a feeling of anxiety pulsing within me, as if the voices of the past still echoed in the silent corridors. With an almost instinctive urge, I decided I needed to explore the house further, especially the attic, a place that seemed to hold deep secrets. I climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing like a whisper of warning. Upon opening the attic door, I was greeted by a cloud of dust and the smell of mold. The daylight barely penetrated that dark space, and the only source of illumination came from a small window covered in cobwebs. I looked around, and the sight of stacked boxes and furniture covered in white sheets made me feel as though I was invading a forgotten sanctuary. In one of the boxes, I found a pile of dusty diaries, their spines worn by time. When I opened one, the smell of aged paper enveloped me, and Margaret's delicate handwriting began to tell her story. "I am Margaret," said the first page, like an intimate introduction. I felt a shiver as I realized I was about to dive into the life of someone who had vanished without a trace. The pages revealed a world I could barely imagine, full of emotions, yearnings, and fears. Margaret spoke about her friendship with a young artist named Eliza, and each word seemed to pulse with the intensity of her emotions. It was evident that this friendship was deep, but there was a shadow looming over it, a tension that made my stomach churn. Eliza is the only one who understands me, Margaret wrote. But what we feel is a burden we cannot carry in public. As I read, my connection with Margaret grew stronger, as if her experiences were intertwining with mine. I could almost feel the weight of her words, the pain of living in a society that did not accept who she truly was. The descriptions of their secret meetings, bathed in moonlight, and the emotional exchanges between the two women left me captivated and distressed. But amid this beauty, there was always a lurking fear, a sense that something was about to go wrong. Suddenly, a distant scream sliced through the silence of the attic, causing my heart to race. What was that? I murmured to myself as adrenaline surged through my veins. I stood up abruptly, leaving the diary behind, and ran toward the stairs. The echo of my own heartbeat seemed to accompany my steps as I descended, but upon reaching the hallway, everything was silent. The echo of the scream dissipated, leaving only the whisper of the wind through the broken windows. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing unease inside me. "You're going crazy, Sarah," I murmured, forcing a nervous smile. But the truth was that Margaret's presence was becoming more and more palpable, as if she wanted me to discover something more. I returned to the attic, determined to continue reading. As I went back to the diary, I found more accounts of the friendship between Margaret and Eliza, and the social pressure they faced. "Eliza always tells me we should be free," Margaret wrote. "But how can we be free if the world confines us?" Each sentence hit me like an arrow, revealing the sadness of a time when freedom was a distant concept for women like them. Margaret's words began to intertwine with my own feelings. Her struggle against social expectations, her search for a love that could not be expressed openly, resonated within me in a way I had never felt before. It was as if Margaret was guiding me, making me live her experiences, and I could not avoid the emotion that arose. As morning turned into afternoon, I realized I needed to know more about Eliza. The relationship between the two women seemed to be the key to understanding what really happened to Margaret. "Who was Eliza to you, Margaret?" I asked aloud, as if hoping her spirit would respond. Silence, however, was the only answer. I decided it was time to investigate further. With the diary in hand, I descended the stairs, and as I passed through the hallway, a strange sensation enveloped me again, as if someone were watching me. A chill ran down my spine, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I found a secret drawer in Margaret's room, and upon opening it, I was greeted by a collection of undelivered love letters. The yellowed paper and the unspoken words cried out for attention. With my hands trembling with excitement, I began to read the letters. They were addressed to a mysterious R. "Dear R." One of them began, and the following words revealed an intense and unrequited passion. "I can't live without you, but the world won't let us be happy. What should I do?" Each letter seemed to pulse with the pain and anguish of a lost love, echoing my own fears and insecurities. The content of the letters made me reflect on my own relationships, on the fears that held me back from loving fully. I saw myself in Margaret, in her desperate search for connection in a world that did not accept her. When I finished reading one particularly emotional letter, the light in the room began to flicker, and a sudden chill ran through my body. The feeling that Margaret was trying to communicate something intensified. "Margaret, what do you want to tell me?" I asked, looking around for any sign, any answer. But silence continued to reign, and the unease within me grew. I began to feel that the house was alive, as if it too were eager to reveal its secrets. Margaret's presence seemed to intensify, and I wondered if I was really prepared to discover what had happened to her. As the days went by, reading the diaries and letters became an obsession. I wasn't just reading Margaret's words, I was feeling them. My connection with her grew stronger each day, and the line between my life and hers began to blur. It was as if I were living her memories, her joys, and her pains. With each page turned, I felt closer to her, but also more trapped in that dark story. And then, one night, while writing in my own diary, the sound of footsteps echoed again, this time closer. My heart racing, I turned quickly, but the room was empty. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than ever. "Margaret, are you here?" I called out, almost in a whisper. Silence was the only response, but the pressure in the air was undeniable. That night passed in a whirlwind of emotions, the connection with Margaret becoming almost unbearable. I needed to unravel the mysteries surrounding her life, her friendship with Eliza, and that unrequited love that seemed so devastating. The house, with its shadows and echoes, was absorbing me, and I knew I needed to be strong, not just for myself, but for Margaret. The search for answers was just beginning, and I was determined to understand not only what happened to Margaret, but also what it meant for me. The voices of the past were becoming a part of me, and I was about to discover what the house truly held. The morning light streamed through the attic window, illuminating a pile of dusty objects that seemed to guard secrets from the past. The box I had found was covered in dust and cobwebs. When I opened it, a smell of aged paper enveloped me, and my heart raced with anticipation. Among the yellowed pages, I found Margaret's diary, and a wave of curiosity washed over me. I began to read, and each word revealed a world completely different from my own. Margaret spoke of her friendship with Eliza, a young artist who, according to reports, had the free spirit that society at the time abhorred. As I read about the secret meetings of the two women, I felt increasingly connected to them. It was as if the pages of the diary had the power to transport me to that time, where the whispers of a forbidden friendship echoed within the walls of the house. "You can't tell anyone, Margaret," Eliza said, her words dancing between the lines. "If society finds out, we'll be ruined." Eliza's desperation resonated within me, and I could imagine the tension in the air, the fear of being discovered. It was a struggle against oppression, against the norms that dictated whom they could love and how they should live. As the story unfolded, I realized that their friendship went beyond what was acceptable. They shared dreams, laughter, and worries, but they were also surrounded by a world that would not accept their union. The weight of this reality began to affect me emotionally. I felt Margaret's anguish as if it were my own, and tears began to slip down my face as I read. "I love her, Eliza," Margaret wrote, the trembling handwriting overflowing with feelings. "But I fear what this means. What will they do to us?" The pain of uncertainty was palpable, and I couldn't help but think about how society still fought against love in its many forms. If Margaret and Eliza were alive today, how would they have dealt with the world they found themselves in? What would I do if I were in their place? One night, while writing about the discoveries I had made, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed again through the hallways. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't ignore the presence that seemed to be around me. "Margaret," I called, my voice trembling slightly, but the response came in the form of a dense silence, as if the house were holding its breath. "If you're here, help me understand." The connection between us felt undeniable. I was so immersed in Margaret's story that it was as if she were manifesting through me. The voices of the friendship she and Eliza shared, the love that blossomed amid so much adversity, enveloped me in a tight and painful embrace. The reading of the diary continued, and more secrets began to emerge. The pages spoke of a world where love was a crime, where the friendship between two women was seen as a threat. The intensity of their relationship made me question the nature of love and friendship. How is it possible that two such connected souls are condemned to live in the shadows? I asked aloud, reflecting on the injustice that Margaret faced. Each entry in the diary left me more anxious. I wanted to save that friendship. I wanted to scream to the world that they had the right to be happy, but the story had already been written. Margaret's pain became mine, and I couldn't help but feel powerless in the face of her struggle. However, one day, while wandering through the garden of the house, I found myself thinking about Eliza. What had happened to her? Was their friendship truly so strong that it could withstand anything? Or had it succumbed to external pressures? The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the flowers, and I felt compelled to continue the search for answers. "Please, Eliza, help me understand," I murmured, as if the artist could hear my plea. I needed to know what really happened to them, how their lives intertwined, and what tragic fate awaited Margaret. Determined to uncover more about this forbidden friendship, I returned to the diary. Margaret's words guided me, and I realized that I was actually becoming part of her story. The emotions intensified with each page, and I could feel the echoes of their laughter and tears. The moments of happiness were overshadowed by the shadow of fear and betrayal, and with each new paragraph, I felt closer to Margaret. That night, as I wrote about the discovery of their friendship, an idea struck me like lightning. What if I could help rewrite the story? What if, through my words, I could give a voice to Margaret and Eliza? The thought filled me with hope, but also a palpable fear. What would happen if I failed? With each passing day, the house became more oppressive. The footsteps echoed more frequently, as if the house itself were stirring with the revelation of the secrets it kept. I could not escape the feeling of being watched. During one particularly restless night, the presence behind me felt stronger. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but the response came only in the form of a deafening silence. As the plot unfolded, the visions of Margaret and Eliza began to intensify. I found myself in moments that were not mine, witnessing their friendship in action. The joy of clandestine meetings, the furtive glances, and shared laughter. But I also saw the pain they faced, the disapproving looks from society, and the whispers that surrounded them. "You can't do this, Margaret," I heard a voice say, and it felt as if the echo of that phrase amplified within me. "You can't love who you desire." The shadows of the house seemed to gather around me, and I felt that the story of Margaret and Eliza was intertwining with my own. The feeling of connection grew stronger. I was not just an observer. I was living their experiences, their fears, their joys, and for a moment, I realized that their love and friendship were stronger than any social convention. This friendship, though condemned, was a transformative force, a light amid the darkness. I was about to lose myself completely in this connection when a new distant scream echoed through the house. I was overtaken by the urgency to find out what was happening. I quickly got up and, with my heart racing, went toward the sound. But upon arriving at the location, all I found was the profound silence that surrounded every corner of that Victorian house. Feeling a chill run down my spine, I returned to my room, where the story of Margaret and Eliza continued to guide me. With each new day, I drew closer to the truth, but I also felt increasingly near to a dark fate that could await not just Margaret, but me as well. And as I wrote, the line between the past and the present became thinner, as if the house were warning me that I was not just a narrator but part of the story that was about to unfold. As I explored the Victorian house, a mix of fascination and unease dominated my being. After days of silence, I finally decided to investigate the locked room that had caught my attention since my arrival. Curiosity pulsed within me like a drum, but a strange sense of dread held me back from acting. What could be hidden behind that door? What could Margaret, the woman who disappeared, have left behind? On a sunny afternoon, I decided it was time to explore deeper. I climbed the creaking stairs and headed to the attic, a place that exuded history and mystery. The light filtered through small, dusty windows, creating shadows that danced on the walls. Upon opening a dusty chest, I found a wooden box, rusted and worn by time. With some effort, I managed to open the box and, to my surprise, found a collection of diaries, all belonging to Margaret. That moment was like opening a door to the past. Flipping through the yellowed pages, I realized that Margaret was not just a woman who had disappeared. She had a life, a story full of emotions and secrets. With each word read, a new layer of her soul was revealed. In her writings, Margaret spoke of her intense and forbidden friendship with a young artist named Eliza. Her words were filled with passion and pain, and I felt increasingly connected to this woman who lived so many decades ago. She was the only one who truly understood me, Margaret wrote in one of the diaries. But society sees us as strange, as if the love between us were a crime. The lines were filled with despair and hope, a reflection of a love that defied the norms of the time. My heart ached. How was it possible that in another time, in another place, a friendship could be seen as taboo? As I delved into Margaret's narrative, a distant scream interrupted my focus. The sound was sharp and terrifying, echoing through the hallways of the house. Heart racing, I quickly got up and headed toward the source of the sound. But upon reaching the spot, I found nothing but silence. The unease enveloping me grew, as if the house were alive, watching my every move. "What do you want from me, Margaret?" I whispered to the air, hoping for an answer that never came. The following day brought a renewed determination. I needed to understand more about the friendship between Margaret and Eliza. As I continued reading the diaries, I discovered that their relationship was filled with tensions and secrets. "Eliza is the only one who can see beyond appearances," Margaret wrote in a moment of vulnerability. "But the world does not accept our love. What will we do if we are discovered?" These words reverberated in my mind. What Margaret and Eliza faced was a struggle not only against prejudice but also against the very feelings that bound them together. I felt an intense emotional connection to Margaret, as if her experiences intertwined with mine. It was as if I were living her pains and longings. One night, while trying to write, I heard the footsteps that tormented me so. They echoed closer, as if someone were approaching me. A cold breeze swept through the room, and for a moment, the sense of presence became palpable. I quickly turned around, but there was no one, just silence and darkness. The tension mounted, and the connection to Margaret grew stronger, as if the house were calling me to discover more. It was then that, in a deeper search, I found a secret drawer in Margaret's room. My hands trembled with excitement as I opened it. Inside were undelivered love letters, all addressed to a mysterious R. The paper was yellowed, and the words, written in delicate handwriting, revealed an intense and unrequited passion. "I love you, R," one of the letters began, "but my heart is a prisoner that cannot be freed." With each letter I read, I felt that Margaret was opening up to me, sharing her deepest emotions. "How can I love someone who cannot love me back?" I read, and it made me reflect on my own insecurities and fears regarding love. The letters were a testament to her emotional struggle and, at the same time, a mirror of my own experiences. As I read one particularly emotional letter, the light in the room began to flicker. A sudden chill filled the atmosphere, and I felt as if Margaret were trying to communicate with me. "What do you want to tell me?" I asked aloud, hoping my question would echo in the air. Suddenly, an image of Margaret appeared in my mind, and I saw her in a moment of despair, writing frantically in her diary, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot live without him, but I cannot have him," she whispered in my mind, her pain resonating in my heart. It was as if I were witnessing her struggle in real time, and the connection between us became increasingly intense. As the days went by, the letters revealed more about Margaret's life. I discovered that R was a young, influential man in the city who, for some reason, could not or did not want to commit to her. He was the embodiment of all of Margaret's hopes and frustrations. In her writings, she wondered if a love like hers could truly exist in a world that did not accept her. "What can I do for him to see my love?" she wrote, and I felt the anguish of her words crossing through time. The voices of the past began to whisper louder, almost as if the house were trying to tell me its story. I felt the pressure of the forces inhabiting the house intensifying, as if I were being pulled into Margaret's narrative. Every letter, every diary I read, seemed to connect me more to this woman who suffered so much. Her struggle reflected that of so many other women throughout history, including my own. It was as if the past and present intertwined, forming a fabric of shared experiences. One night, as the wind howled outside, I decided that I needed to uncover more about the true identity of R. With the help of some research, I discovered that he was a respected man in the community, someone who had the power to shape public opinion. But what had happened between him and Margaret that made her feel so rejected? Why couldn't she free herself from this consuming love? As the answers began to emerge, a sense of despair grew in my chest. I was entangled in Margaret's story, and the connection I felt was becoming increasingly intense. What was in this house that kept her trapped? What could I do to help her find peace? That night, after a vivid nightmare about Margaret, I woke up with the feeling of being watched. I looked in the mirror and saw a shadow moving behind me. My heart raced, and for a moment, I thought I was losing my sanity. "Margaret," I called, my voice trembling. "Are you here?" The answer came in the form of a whisper, almost inaudible. "Help me." It was her voice, so clear and anguished. The weight of the story she carried became unbearable. I knew I had to confront the truths buried in the house, and that this might mean risking everything I knew. But there was no turning back. Margaret's story called to me, and I could not ignore it. With determination coursing through my veins, I prepared for what was to come. I needed to understand what had really happened between Margaret and Eliza, and what secrets the house still held. Margaret's struggle became my struggle, and I was willing to face the shadows of the past to free not only her soul but my own. The atmosphere inside the Victorian house was thick, almost palpable. The smell of aged wood mixed with the scent of dust enveloped me as I ventured into the attic, determined to explore every corner of that enigmatic place. The day had been long, and the sunlight was slowly fading, leaving a cozy twilight that simultaneously brought a sense of unease. It was in this charged environment that I found a dusty box, covered by a fine layer of dust and cobwebs. With a surge of curiosity, I opened the box and was fascinated by what I found. Diaries, many diaries, all belonging to Margaret. It was as if I had discovered a portal to the past, a glimpse into the life of a woman who had mysteriously disappeared for some reason. "Margaret, what happened to you?" I whispered to myself as I flipped through the yellowed pages. The letters, written in elegant handwriting, seemed to dance before me. Each sentence revealed a new facet of her life, her hopes and fears. As I read, I realized that Margaret was not alone. There was a young artist, Eliza, mentioned repeatedly. The friendship between the two seemed intense and deep, but there was a shadow looming over it, as if dark secrets and betrayals were lurking. Why was this friendship so complicated? I murmured, as a wave of empathy washed over me. The pages revealed a friendship that challenged the social norms of the time, and I couldn't help but wonder how society's expectations had shaped their lives. I was interrupted by a distant scream that echoed through the house, but when I rushed toward the sound, all I found was a disturbing silence. The nights grew increasingly unsettling. During one of those nights, while I was writing, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed again through the halls. I was so focused on my notes that I barely noticed how much the shadows seemed to move around me. I felt as though a presence was behind me, but when I turned quickly, I realized I was alone, or at least that was what I thought. The chill that enveloped me was not just the night's temperature. It was a feeling that something or someone was watching. The search for answers led me to discover a secret drawer in Margaret's room, where I found undelivered love letters. The letters were filled with emotion, written to an R, a mystery that seemed key to understanding Margaret's pain. The unrequited passion was evident in every word, making me reflect on my own romantic experiences. As I read one particularly poignant letter, the light in the room began to flicker. A chill ran down my spine, and the feeling that Margaret was trying to communicate something to me intensified. The identity of R became an obsession. I discovered that he was a young, influential man in town, someone who, for some reason, had abandoned Margaret. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, but the pressure from the forces inhabiting the house seemed to increase, as if I were being pulled into Margaret's tragic story. It was as if the house were alive, and I wondered if I was losing my sanity, or if all of this was real. One night, after a vivid nightmare that left me in a state of panic, I woke up gasping, feeling that the devil of the house was watching me through the mirror. The reflection was distorted, and for a moment, I thought I could see Margaret's silhouette behind me. This can't be happening, I thought as I tried to calm myself. The connection I was forming with Margaret was growing stronger, and I didn't know if I was being guided or if I was losing myself in her story. Days passed, and the anxiety built up inside me. With each new revelation about Margaret and Eliza, I felt the house becoming more oppressive. The echo of footsteps seemed closer, and the voices of the past began to whisper in my ears. I was being called, and Margaret's story seemed to intertwine with mine in a way I couldn't understand. "Why won't you leave me alone?" I shouted in a moment of despair, hoping the walls of the house would answer me. But all I received was a deafening silence. The feeling of being lost in a labyrinth of secrets and pain was suffocating. Nothing could prepare me for what was to come. Each night, the visions of Margaret grew more intense. I saw flashes of her life, moments of joy and pain that seemed to blend with my own emotions. It was as if we were connected, and I could no longer distinguish where my story ended and hers began. When Margaret showed me the suffering she faced due to social pressures and the betrayal of those she loved, my heart ached in response. It was a struggle for freedom that I felt deeply. On one particularly heavy night, while I was writing, the pen began to move on its own. Words appeared on the paper as if Margaret were guiding me. "I am here," the message stated, and tears streamed down my face. I wanted to believe that I could help Margaret find peace, but the more I delved, the more I felt I was entangled in her fate. The last night of Margaret in the house, marked by a fierce argument with Eliza, unfolded before me. I could almost hear the echoes of their voices, the tension in the air, the pain of words spoken and unspoken. The house seemed to react, the shadows growing denser, and the atmosphere was so charged that I could feel the weight on my chest. When I entered the locked room, the atmosphere changed completely. The portrait of Margaret and Eliza was there, framed, reflecting the depth of the friendship they shared. But there was also betrayal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was about to be revealed. "Margaret, what happened to you?" I asked, but the only response was the silence echoing through the walls of the house. The tension grew, and I knew I was on the brink of a devastating revelation. The voices of the past, the echoes of laughter and tears, all blended into a deafening clamor. I was about to uncover what really happened on that fateful night, but the fear of discovering the truth paralyzed me. What hides in the shadows, waiting to be revealed? The atmosphere in the Victorian house was increasingly oppressive. The daylight seemed to fade, and darkness approached, as if the shadows were waiting to manifest. My heart raced as I tried to organize my thoughts. The research on Margaret had taken an unexpected turn. It was not just a search for a story, but a journey that connected me to a woman who had vanished decades ago. And now, with each discovery, I felt that something deeper was at stake. That morning, after a troubled night, I decided to go to the local cemetery. The town of Salem had a heavy air of history, and I knew I needed to understand what happened to Margaret. As I walked among the gravestones, the cold breeze made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The cemetery was a labyrinth of memories, a collection of stories intertwined with the lives buried there. With each step I took, the feeling that Margaret was still present grew. "If you were here, what would you tell me?" I murmured, not expecting a response. I looked up at the sky, as if hoping she would appear in some way. The silence that followed was deafening, and I wondered if anyone had ever truly heard the voices of the dead. On returning to the house, an idea struck me. I needed to speak with someone who could help me understand more about Margaret and her story. A local historian, Mr. Collins, was known for his knowledge of the town's former residents. With determination, I called him and made an appointment. "Ah, Sarah, I'm glad you reached out," he said, opening the door with a warm smile. Mr. Collins had gray hair and a gentle voice that conveyed confidence. "I heard you're investigating Margaret's house. It's a fascinating, yet tragic story." "Yes, I'm really worried about what I found. It seems her life was full of secrets and rivalries. Do you know anything about what happened to her?" I asked, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. Margaret was a very talented woman, but also very misunderstood. She had a deep friendship with a young woman named Eliza. There was a rivalry between them, and many believe that this may have contributed to her disappearance. He explained as he led me into his living room, filled with old books and documents. Eliza was an artist, but her life was marked by jealousy and disillusionment. People of that time did not readily accept friendships between women, especially when love was involved. A love? The question, intrigued. You mean there was something more between them? That's what many historians believe. The letters Margaret wrote, the ones you must have found, reveal more than just friendship. She was in love with Eliza, but society wouldn't accept that. It drove her into a state of despair, he replied, his eyes shining with the passion for the history he shared. And the more I read, the more I am convinced that Eliza's jealousy may have been an important factor. I felt a chill run down my spine. The undelivered love letters I had found were a testament to repressed feelings. Could Eliza be the key to understanding what really happened that fateful night? The idea of confronting her spirit made me uneasy, but I knew I needed to uncover the truth. And what about Margaret's rival? You mentioned there was an influential young man, R, who left her. I asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. The young R was one of the most respected men in town. He had a brief romance with Margaret, but he abandoned her. His departure may have been the catalyst for the tragedy that followed. Mr. Collins explained, with a look of sorrow. Margaret was devastated. The social pressures and her internal struggle led her to a dark place. Do you think she is still trapped in the house? I inquired, my voice trembling slightly. I feel like she is trying to communicate something to me. The spirit of someone who hasn't found peace can certainly remain tied to a place. The house may reflect her emotions, he said, gazing out the window with a thoughtful expression. But you must be careful. Sometimes, the truths we seek can be more than we are prepared to face. Those words echoed in my mind as I left Mr. Collins' house. The sun was beginning to set, and darkness was settling in again. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the idea that something was about to happen. Upon entering my house, the heavy atmosphere enveloped me. I needed to return to the locked room on the second floor. Something was calling me. With my heart racing, I climbed the stairs and approached the door. The doorknob was cold to the touch, and I hesitated for a moment, recalling Mr. Collins' warnings. Would it be wise to open this door? I need to know, I whispered to myself, as if that could give me courage. With a resolute motion, I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room was dusty, and the dim light made the atmosphere gloomy. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a table covered by a sheet. Pulling it back, a cloud of dust rose, revealing a portrait of Margaret and Eliza. The expressions on their faces were intense, and the connection between them felt palpable. The friendship I had read about in the journals now became more real. Margaret, what happened to you? I murmured, a wave of sadness washing over me. The image was a testament to a strong bond, but also to a betrayal that seemed to linger in the air. As I examined the portrait, a soft voice echoed in the room, almost like a whisper. You were getting closer, but the truth is more complex than you imagine. I froze, the voice sounding like a distant echo, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow pass behind me. Who is there? I shouted, but the room was silent. Fear began to creep in, and I wondered if I was losing my sanity. I knew I needed to understand what was happening, but the idea of confronting Margaret's past terrified me. I quickly descended the stairs, my heart pounding uncontrollably. I needed to distract myself, focus on something tangible. I grabbed the journals and began reading again. Margaret's words were a cry for help, a desperate search for understanding. Each page revealed more about her life, her hopes, and her fears. It was as if she were guiding me on her journey. I'm here, Margaret, I said aloud, hoping she could hear me. I won't give up on you. That night, as I tried to sleep, the footsteps I had heard earlier began echoing again. The sound was closer now, and a strange sensation of déjà vu enveloped me. I got out of bed and followed the sound, feeling an invisible force pulling me. Please, Show me what happened. I cried as the footsteps grew more intense. The house seemed to vibrate with the energy of the past, and I knew I was about to discover something crucial. As I entered the living room, the lights began to flicker, and the air grew heavy. Shadows danced around me, and I felt Margaret's presence like never before. It was as if she were there, ready to share her truth. "You are not alone," the voice whispered again, now clearer. "I need you to know the pain I felt, the betrayal that enveloped me. You are the only one who can understand. Margaret, I will help you. I will find the truth. I promised," feeling a wave of determination. But the house began to tremble, and the voices of the past intensified. I knew I was about to face something much greater than I could imagine. The connection between Margaret and me grew stronger each day, but with each revelation, I also felt like I was losing myself. The shadows of the house seemed to close in, as if they wanted to swallow me whole. The truth about Margaret was a double-edged sword, and I was about to find out if I could handle what was to come. In the last few days, the Victorian house I found myself in had become a place of mystery and unease. What had once been just an imposing structure now pulsed with a strange energy, as if the walls whispered secrets and the shadows danced to the tune of untold stories. Each night, the footsteps grew louder, more urgent, and I could no longer ignore the connection I felt with Margaret. It was as if, somehow, she was trying to communicate with me, and I could no longer retreat. That night, as I wrote, the light in the room flickered intermittently, bringing a sharp chill that ran down my spine. I looked up from the paper and scanned the room as if expecting something or someone to manifest. "Margaret," I called, my voice trembling with anticipation and fear. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but I didn't give up. "If you are here, please tell me something. I want to understand." The air seemed to carry a palpable tension, and suddenly, a gentle breeze swept through the room, causing the papers on the table to flutter. My heart raced. "Do you want me to read more about you? About your life?" I asked, almost in a whisper, and then, as if an invisible force were guiding me, my pen began to move on its own across the paper. The letters formed rapidly, and I laughed nervously, unsure if I should feel fear or relief. "What are you trying to tell me?" I asked, staring in bewilderment at the floating pen. The words began to take shape. The oppression, the betrayal, the truth. The feeling of connection with Margaret intensified. I could feel her pain, her hopes, and her frustrations, and suddenly, I found myself not just as an observer, but as a participant in her story. It was as if the barriers of time and space were dissolving, and I was being pulled into her memories. The light in the room flickered again, and the words being written seemed to echo in my mind. "You need to know what happened, Sarah?" A soft and sad voice reverberated in my thoughts. It was Margaret's voice. "Eliza and we were more than friends. We were in love, but society did not allow that. Our feelings were a condemnation. I didn't know," I murmured, reality unfolding before me like a puzzle. "You were forced to hide. And then, something went wrong. Visions began to emerge, like a movie in my mind. I saw flashes of moments. Margaret and Eliza meeting secretly, shared laughter, but also tears and despair. "Eliza," I whispered, recognizing the young artist I had read about in the journals. "She was your rival, wasn't she? What happened between you?" The answer came in a whirlwind of emotions. "Love is complicated, Sarah. Love between women was dangerous. When Eliza betrayed me, everything changed. That last night was a disaster. I was surrounded by shadows, and trust turned into despair. I could see the tears in Margaret's eyes, the pain reflected on her face. But you can't let that happen again. You're so close to the truth. Don't let yourself be carried away by the shadows." I'm trying to understand all this, but I feel like I'm being pulled into your story. It's as if I'm living it beside you, I confessed. Margaret's emotions were so intense that I could barely breathe. "And now I feel your pain as if it were mine. You are strong, Sarah, stronger than I was." Margaret's voice echoed again, and the pen began to write more quickly. You can't let history repeat itself. Face your own shadows. I'm here, but you need to fight for yourself. I felt a shiver run through my body. How can I fight? What should I do? The words rushed out of my lips. Discover the truth, she replied. The truth about Eliza, about what happened the night I disappeared. You need to confront what is hidden in the shadows. Only then can you free not just me, but yourself. A clearer vision formed in my mind. A fight between Margaret and Eliza. I could see them in a dark room, the tension in the air so thick it felt palpable. Margaret, you know we can't keep going like this. No one can know about us. Eliza shouted, her voice laden with despair. I don't care what they think. I just want to be happy with you. Margaret replied, passion and frustration overflowing from her words. But I knew that this happiness was impossible in such an oppressive world. You don't understand. If we stay together, they will destroy us, Eliza said, her voice trembling. And then, the scene dissolved, replaced by a dense darkness, as if the house itself were absorbing that energy. Margaret, I need to know what happened after that. What happened that night? I pleaded, as if my voice could bring the truth to light. You must find the answers, Sarah. They are hidden among the shadows of the house. The locked room. It holds secrets that no one should ever know. But you are strong enough to face them, Margaret said, her voice now a gentle breeze in my ears. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I confessed, fear tightening my chest. What if I get lost? What if I can't come back? You won't get lost. I will be with you, even if you can't see me, she replied, and I felt a wave of warmth and comfort envelop me. The truth is a dangerous path, but it's the only path that can free you from your own chains. The pen stopped moving, and I realized the connection was fading. Margaret, wait, don't go, I shouted, but the light in the room began to flicker again, and her presence started to dissipate. Face your shadows, Sarah. You are stronger than you think, she whispered, and I saw her figure fade into the air. Fight for me, fight for yourself. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. I was alone again, but not in the same way as before. The connection I felt with Margaret was not just a memory. It was a call to action. I needed to uncover the truth, not just for her memory, but for myself. The shadows that inhabited the house could not hold me captive. I was not a lost soul, but a woman determined to write my own story. I got up from the table, feeling the adrenaline pulse through my veins. The house seemed to vibrate around me, an echo of my determination. The door to the locked room appeared to glow, inviting and threatening at the same time. What would I find inside? I didn't know, but I was ready to face whatever it was. After all, I was not just fighting for Margaret. I was fighting for all of us who, in some way, had been silenced, forgotten, and lost in the shadows of the past. I will find the truth, Margaret. I promise, I declared, feeling the strength of my own voice echoing off the walls of the house. And with that determination, I made my way toward the locked room, my heart racing and my mind clear. Margaret's story could not end in tragedy. Not while I was alive. The atmosphere in the Victorian house grew heavier, as if the very air was becoming dense and hard to breathe. I had immersed myself in Margaret's story, and with each new discovery, the feeling that we were connected grew stronger. That night, as the shadows danced on the walls, I realized I needed to understand what had really happened on that last night of Margaret's. What had led her to disappear, to leave behind a legacy of pain and secrets. The fight between Margaret and Eliza became a constant presence in my mind. What could have been so devastating that it drove such a deep friendship to an abyss? It was as if the walls of the house were whispering the answer, but I still couldn't hear them clearly. I decided I needed to go to the locked room on the second floor. The mystery it held was calling me, and I could no longer ignore it. I slowly climbed the stairs, the sound of my heart echoing in my ears, almost in sync with the steps still resonating in my memory. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the house itself was trying to prevent me from uncovering the truth. Upon reaching the door of the room, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The doorknob was cold to the touch, and I hesitated for a brief moment before turning it. To my surprise, the door creaked open, revealing a dusty, forgotten space. Inside the room, the dimness was nearly total, except for a sliver of light coming through a dirt-covered window. The air was charged with a sense of abandonment, as if everything there was waiting to be revealed. What I didn't expect was the portrait that immediately caught my attention, hanging on the opposite wall. It was a painting of Margaret and Eliza, both with deep and complex expressions. Their friendship shone through in the image, but there was also a palpable tension, a conflict I couldn't identify. "Margaret," I murmured, feeling the connection pulse within me. "What happened between you?" The answer seemed to float in the air, but I needed more than a feeling. I approached the painting and examined every detail. Margaret's eyes seemed to scream for help, while Eliza's reflected a sadness bordering on anger. It was clear there was something more behind that friendship, and I needed to discover what it was. "Why did you fight?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper, as if I were conversing with the shadows. "What did you want, Margaret? What made you disappear?" The feeling of being watched intensified, and a sudden chill enveloped the room. The portrait seemed to pulse with its own energy, as if Margaret and Eliza's unresolved emotions were trapped there, waiting to be released. I looked around and noticed an old desk, covered in dust, with an open diary on it. My heart raced at the sight of Margaret's diary, and I couldn't resist the temptation to approach it. Carefully, I moved closer to the desk and, as I read the yellowed pages, I realized they contained notes about her friendship with Eliza. Margaret's words were laden with hope and fear, a mix of love and despair that made me feel her pain as if it were my own. "Eliza is my light and my shadow," she had written on one of the pages. "I am so lost without her, but the world will not accept our friendship. What will we do if society separates us?" Margaret's questions echoed in my mind. How had they come to this point? The reading continued, and soon I came across an entry that made my heart stop. "Today, Eliza and I argued about our friendship. She doesn't understand that the love I feel for her is not just friendship. What is happening between us is deeper, but the fear of society consumes us. I don't know how much longer we can endure this." The anguish in Margaret's words was palpable, and a tear rolled down my face. "Oh, dear Margaret," I whispered, feeling a deep sorrow for the young woman who had lived here. "You didn't have to suffer like this." But as I read, a noise to my left made me freeze. I looked quickly, but there was nothing there, just shadows moving on the walls. A shiver ran down my spine. "Margaret," I called, not knowing why I did. "Are you here?" A deep silence answered, and then I returned to the diary, trying to focus. It was clear that their friendship had deteriorated under the weight of societal expectations. "If only I could muster the courage to tell Eliza how I feel," Margaret continued in another entry. "Maybe the pressure would ease, but what if she doesn't feel the same? What if it destroys us?" The tension grew, and I felt I was on the verge of discovering something important. Margaret's words were filled with vulnerability, and I wondered if she had truly confessed her feelings to Eliza. What would have happened if she had done so? What stopped her? The reading was interrupted once more by a sound, this time louder. It was like a whisper, almost a call. "Sarah?" The voice seemed to come from afar, an echo crossing space and infiltrating my mind. "Sarah, help me." "Margaret," I shouted, my heart racing uncontrollably. "What do you need from me?" A biting cold took over the room, and I knew I wasn't alone. The house felt alive, pulsing with the energy of the story I was trying to unravel. I looked once more at the portrait of the two women. What could have happened that last night? What led their friendship to a point of no return? I entered a state of deep concentration, trying to connect with Margaret's energy. Visions began to emerge in my mind, flashes of moments between her and Eliza. Laughter, tears, whispered promises under the moonlight. But there were also shadows, voices of censure echoing in their ears. Society would not allow them to be happy. Fear and pressure were like chains binding them. Then, one vision stood out among the others. A rainy night, a fierce argument. The two women were in the garden of the house, the storm reflecting the turmoil of their feelings. Eliza, tears in her eyes, shouting, "You don't understand, Margaret. We can't live like this. What will people think? You're putting everything at risk." Margaret, on the other hand, was desperate. "I don't care what people think, Eliza. I love you. I can't keep living a lie." Margaret's words resonated in my mind, and a deep pain settled in my chest. The intensity of the scene made me feel as if I were there, witnessing the argument. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Eliza screamed, her voice cutting through the air like a dagger. "You know this could destroy us." The vision dissolved, and I found myself back in the room, my heart racing and my eyes wide. It was the passion and fear that had led those two souls to a tragic end. I needed to know what happened next. With courage growing inside me, I looked at the diary again, determined to understand what had transpired that fateful night. "I am here," I murmured, like a mantra. "I am here to listen to you, Margaret. Tell me what happened." The pages were nearly blank, as if Margaret hadn't been able to write about what happened after that fight. But I soon realized that the answer was there, hidden between the lines. The undelivered love letters, the unfulfilled promises, all contributed to the weight she carried. The love she felt for Eliza had imprisoned her, and the fear of rejection had become unbearable. A new wave of cold enveloped me, and the feeling of being watched grew once more. I looked around the room, my eyes trying to penetrate the darkness. "Margaret, are you here?" I asked, but the response was only the echo of silence. What had happened between them? What led to this silent death? As I tried to piece together the fragments, Margaret's voice echoed in my mind, and I realized that each step I took was bringing me closer to the truth. The house sensed my search, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Deep down, I knew that Margaret's last night would be the key to understanding everything. The anger, the love, and the betrayal that permeated the house were ready to be revealed. I was overcome by an urge to discover this truth, even if it meant facing the ghosts that haunted those halls. As the shadows moved around me, I was determined. The atmosphere of the Victorian house weighed on me, a presence that seemed to intensify with each passing day. Night had fallen, and I found myself alone, surrounded by the distant echo of footsteps resonating through the hallways. My heart raced, and my body moved mechanically, as if guided by an invisible force. I knew I needed to confront the spirit of Margaret, the woman whose life had intertwined with mine in an inexplicable way. With a deep sigh, I sat on the floor of my office, surrounded by the yellow diaries I had found in the attic. The pages were filled with Margaret's thoughts, her hopes and fears, and the connection I felt with her only grew. I didn't just want to understand her story. I felt it was my duty to help her find peace. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to concentrate. "Margaret," I murmured into the void, "I need you to show yourself. I am here to listen to you." A cold breeze swept through the room, causing the candles to flicker and casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped suddenly. It was as if the house was breathing, exhaling the secrets it had kept for so long. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I knew she was there, closer than ever. "Margaret, can you hear me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Then, silence was broken by a distant echo of footsteps. The house seemed to vibrate, and I didn't know if I was ready for what would come next. I stood up, determined, and followed the direction of the sound. The corridor stretched out before me, shrouded in darkness, and the candlelight flickered, making everything even more unsettling. "Margaret, please," I pleaded, "show me the truth. I'm not afraid." As I moved forward, the shadows seemed to shift with me, as if they were dancing around me. The walls of the house appeared to pulse, and the voices of the past whispered in my ears, fragments of untold stories. With each step, I felt a stronger connection to Margaret, as if her emotions were intertwining with mine, her anguish becoming my own. Fear transformed into something deeper, an empathy that made me want to understand her pain. I reached the door of the locked room, the one that had always intrigued me. My breath quickened, and my hand trembled as I touched the doorknob. "If you're here, help me," I said aloud. I hesitated for a moment, but the urgency to uncover the truth propelled me to push the door open. With a creak, it opened, revealing a space cloaked in shadows. The smell of mold and dust was intense, and every step I took seemed to echo into eternity. Inside the room, the walls were covered in dusty portraits, and a large mirror adorned one of the walls. The reflection of my image was distorted, as if the house itself were playing with reality. "Margaret," I called. "If you're here, please show yourself." The tension in the air was palpable, and anticipation pulsed in my chest. Suddenly, a figure began to form in the reflection of the mirror. It was subtle at first, a feminine silhouette that slowly took shape. My heart raced. "Margaret," I called, my voice trembling. "Is it you?" The figure became clearer, and I realized it was indeed her, but her expression was marked by sadness. Her once vibrant eyes now reflected deep pain. "You finally came," her voice echoed, soft and ethereal, like a whisper lost in the wind. "I've waited so long for someone who could hear my story." The emotion in Margaret's voice made my heart ache. "I want to help you," I said, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Please, tell me what happened." She hesitated, her facial expression contorting in pain. "The truth is heavy, and many are not ready to hear it," Margaret replied, her voice resonating in the room. "But you are different. You feel the oppression, the sadness that this house carries." I looked around, realizing that the walls seemed to absorb every word, every emotion. "I'm not just a story," Margaret continued. "I'm an echo of what was lost. Eliza and I were more than friends. We were kindred souls. But society did not look favorably upon that. The love we shared was considered dangerous, and we paid a high price for it." "Eliza, the young artist?" I asked, trying to understand. "What happened between you?" The silence that followed was deafening, and I knew the answer would not be easy to hear. "On that last night, everything broke apart," Margaret whispered, her image seeming to fade a bit. "The pressure was unbearable, and we fought. I loved her, but fear drove us apart. Love can be a powerful force, but it can also be destructive." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a despair I couldn't ignore. "She became my rival, and I became a prisoner of my own anguish." "You can't let that keep you trapped," I said, feeling a wave of compassion. "You need to break free. I want to help you find peace." Hope blossomed in my heart, but Margaret seemed hesitant. "You don't understand," she said, her voice full of sorrow. "The house won't let me go. I'm trapped here, just as you may be." The idea of being trapped there, like an endless shadow, terrified me. "No, I can't stay here," I shouted, reality beginning to overwhelm me. "Then you must face the truth," Margaret whispered, and at that moment, the shadows in the room began to stir, as if the house were responding to our conversation. "You need to confront Eliza. She is the key to what happened to me. What you two had was deep but also dangerous, and now you are at the center of it." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Is Eliza here?" Fear settled in my chest, and the room seemed to tremble around me. "She never let me go," Margaret replied, the sadness in her voice intensifying. "And if you're not careful, she may try to trap you too." I felt a wave of panic, my heart racing. "I can't let that happen," I murmured, determination growing within me. "I won't be another lost soul." At that moment, the shadows began to close in around me, as if the house were reacting to our conversation. "Margaret, help me," I implored, feeling the pressure mounting. "I need to know the truth. What happened that night?" The shadows stirred even more, and Margaret's figure started to fade, her gaze now filled with urgency. "You must be strong," she said, her voice becoming increasingly distant. "Confront Eliza. Face the truth, Only then can you free me. And with that, her image disappeared, leaving me alone in the darkness. The house became a whirlwind of emotions. I was alone, but the connection to Margaret still burned within me. Eliza, I called, my voice echoing down the corridor. If you're here, I want to talk to you. The shadows seemed to be moving, and I didn't know if I was ready for what would come next. The silence was broken by a soft whisper, almost like a distant echo. You shouldn't be here, a feminine voice said, and I turned quickly. Eliza was there, her figure emerging from the shadows, with a grim look and a presence that made me feel the gravity of the situation. You shouldn't have meddled in her story. I'm trying to help Margaret, I replied, holding my breath. She deserves to be heard. You need to let her go. Eliza's gaze hardened, and the tension in the air was palpable. You know nothing about what happened, she retorted, her voice full of contempt. Margaret wasn't the victim you think. She had her secrets too. Secrets? I questioned, my heart racing. What do you mean by that? She was trapped here, and you know that too. The silence that followed was heavy, and the house seemed to wait, as if it were about to explode in a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't want to be free, Eliza said, her voice now soft, almost sad. The air in the house was heavy, as if every wall were absorbing the anguish of generations. I felt the weight of history pulsing around me, and with each step I took, the sensation that I was being watched grew stronger. The old Victorian house, with its imposing architecture and Gothic details, felt more like a graveyard of secrets than a home. And now, as I prepared to confront Margaret's spirit, a mix of fear and determination swelled in my chest. Margaret, if you are here, please show me the truth. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling slightly. The echo of my words seemed to get lost in the silent corridors, but the house immediately reacted. A strong wind blew through the hallways, causing the windows to creak and the doors to slam as if a spirit were trying to break free. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and I could no longer tell if it was fear or the house responding to the call. Suddenly, the atmosphere turned electric. The shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe, dancing in a nearly hypnotic manner. I recalled the visions I had seen, the images of Margaret and Eliza intertwining in their pain and forbidden love. Now, I was about to uncover what truly happened on the fateful night that led to Margaret's disappearance. You can't hide the truth forever, Eliza, I shouted, almost pleading. The air grew cold, and a presence began to materialize before me. The outlines of a woman started to form, her dark eyes illuminated by an otherworldly light. It was Eliza, but not the young, vibrant artist that Margaret had known. The woman before me was a shadow of what she once was, with an expression that blended sadness and anger. You don't understand, do you? Her voice sounded like a cutting whisper. Margaret wasn't the only one who suffered. I was also trapped in this cruel game of society. Our souls were intertwined, and the betrayal wasn't just hers. It was mine too. Why did you betray her? I asked, the pain in my voice nearly making me hesitate. Why did you leave her alone that night? She was on the verge of breaking down. Eliza looked at me with a mix of disdain and sadness. She didn't understand. Margaret was always so innocent, so full of hope. I loved her, but I couldn't bear the pressure. When I found out that her love for me wasn't enough, and that she wanted something more, it consumed me. I wanted her all to myself, but she dreamed of freedom. And then, that night, I lost control. The shadows around Eliza seemed to vibrate with the intensity of her emotions. I could feel her despair, but also her anger. You can't just shirk away from this. You caused her death. I screamed, frustration overtaking me. What happened that night? What did you do? I didn't want her to leave me, Eliza murmured, tears streaming down her ethereal face. When she told me she wanted to go, something inside me broke. That fight, it was more than words. What happened in the heat of the moment was tragic. The house trembled again, as if reacting to the revelations. The air was heavy with the unresolved tension between the two women, and I could feel their pain pulsating like a drum. "You need to tell me, Eliza," I insisted. "If you don't, I won't be able to help you or Margaret." Eliza's figure hesitated, as if she were struggling against the chains of the past. "I can't change what happened, but I can show you. You need to see. You need to understand," she said, her voice now almost a whisper. Suddenly, the house began to transform around me. The walls became translucent, and I saw flashes of a stormy night. Margaret and Eliza were there, in a scene unfolding before me like a nightmare. The two were in the room, the atmosphere tense, and I could feel the electricity in the air. "You can't just leave all of this behind. You can't be free without me," Eliza shouted, her voice resonating with the force of a storm. Margaret, tears in her eyes, tried to distance herself from her, but Eliza held her tight. "I can't live like this, Eliza. I need to be myself, and that doesn't include you," Margaret replied, the pain in her voice palpable. Her despair cut through me like a knife. The struggle between them became physical, a tragic dance of love, possessiveness, and fear. I couldn't look away, even knowing I was about to witness something horrific. Margaret tried to pull away, but Eliza yanked her back, and the tension was so intense it felt as if time itself had stopped. "Don't you understand? I can't lose you," Eliza screamed, her voice echoing through the house like a lament. And then, in a moment of pure desperation, something happened. The glass of a window shattered, and I saw Margaret fall, horror etched on her face as she tried to break free. "Margaret!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the echo of the house. The scene continued to unfold. Eliza, in a fit of rage, pushed Margaret, who fell with a crash. The ground opened up beneath my feet, and I felt the emptiness around me. When the scene ceased, the house returned to silence. I was back in the present, but the pain of the revelations still reverberated within me. "Eliza, why didn't you do anything?" I asked, the words spilling out of me like a plea. "I didn't know how to save her," she replied, her voice now filled with despair. "I loved her, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing her. What I did, what happened that night, I became the villain of our story. But you can change that now. You can free both yourself and Margaret," I implored. "Tell me how." Eliza hesitated, and I saw the struggle on her face. "The only way to free our souls is to confront the truth. You need to break the cycle, Sarah. You need to free yourself from what this house represents." The house began to tremble again, and I realized time was running out. "Eliza, I can't do this alone. Help me. You are the key, Sarah. Only you can end the story. Do it for us. Do it for Margaret." Eliza's figure shouted, and the house seemed to stir in response. I knew I had to act quickly. The pressure was mounting, and the shadows were closing in, as if they wanted to devour me. I remembered the letters, the undelivered love letters Margaret had written. They were the key to the truth, and I needed them now more than ever. I ran to the locked room, where I had found the portrait of Margaret and Eliza. The door felt heavier than before, as if it were resisting my touch. "Let me in," I yelled, pounding on the door. "I need to know." With one last push, the door opened, and I stepped inside. The room was shrouded in shadows, but the letters were there, lined up on an old table. I grabbed one, and as I opened it, the words leaped out, revealing Margaret's pain and passion. "I will always be by your side, even if you don't want me. No matter what happens, my love for you is eternal." The words danced before my eyes, and I realized that these letters were more than just words. They were a cry for freedom, a desire to be heard. "Margaret, I will share your story," I promised, my voice echoing through the room. "I will free you." With each letter I read, the energy in the house began to change. The shadows that once seemed threatening started to dissipate, and I felt as though I was breaking the chains that held Margaret captive. The voices of the past began to whisper, and I knew the story was unfolding. "You no longer belong to this place, Margaret," I shouted, my voice resonating with the force of a storm. "Be free. Go in peace." At that moment, A wave of light flooded the room. Eliza was by my side, and I saw tears streaming down her face. "You did it, Sarah. You broke the cycle. Now we can finally rest." As the light enveloped Margaret, I felt a sense of relief. The house began to vibrate, and the shadows dissipated into a golden glow.